Hi, kids. I'd like to tell you about Good Friday this time. So, Pastor Colin told you about Maundy Thursday, and Jesus had been interrogated all night long. So, this is early Friday morning. The Jews took Jesus in chains to Pilate's palace. Pilate was in Jerusalem to keep order during the excitable days of Passover. This man has been stirring up trouble, they told Pilate. He tells people not to pay taxes and says he's a king. If these charges were true, Jesus would be sentenced to death. But Pilate was certain that the religious leaders had trumped up the charges because they were jealous of Jesus. He began to cross-question him and could find nothing wrong that he had done. All the while, a mob below in the street, mustered and led by the priests and Jewish leaders, were chanting over and over, "Crucify, crucify, crucify." Pilate came out to speak to them. "This man is completely innocent," he announced. "He doesn't deserve to die." The chant swelled to a deafening roar. "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate tried another way out. "It's Passover time," he said. "I shall set a prisoner free as part of the celebrations. Let me set Jesus free." But the leaders were ready with a new slogan. "We want Barabbas! We want Barabbas!" And the crowd took up the cry. Now, Barabbas was a mob leader who was in prison for murder. And Pilate was at his wits' end. If the crowd rioted, he might lose his job. He dare not release Jesus, even though Roman justice declared him innocent. He decided to wash his hands of the whole matter and hand Jesus over to be put to death by crucifixion, as the mob insisted. So Pilate gave in to the wishes of the mob and their leaders. He set Barabbas free and ordered his mercenaries to whip Jesus before taking him to be crucified. Roman whips were made from leather strips weighted with pieces of metal, and prisoners often had injuries from the whipping. After they had whipped Jesus, the Roman soldiers teased him cruelly. He was supposed to be a king, was he? They dressed him in a purple robe, and one of them quickly put together a crown made of thorns and stuck it on his head. Then they knelt to him in mock homage, proclaiming, "Long live the king," before spitting in his face. Soon it was time to take the prisoner to the place of execution. By Jewish law, they had to be outside the city gates. The procession set off down the hill towards Golgotha, also known as Skull Place. A mocking, shouting crowd followed, and a few women went too, crying to see the good, brave teacher being led off to die. Now, prisoners were expected to carry the rough wooden crossbar on which they would be executed, and the soldiers had already laid the heavy beam on Jesus' shoulders. But Jesus was weak from the long interrogations and the whipping. He could scarcely walk upright beneath its weight. Another Jew in Jerusalem for Passover came striding up the hill towards them. "Here, you," the centurion called, laying a firm hand on his arm. "Carry the cross for the prisoner. We'll never get there at the rate we're going." Simon was strong and broad-shouldered, he carefully lifted the cross from Jesus' torn shoulders and hoisted it onto his own. Together, they walked the rest of the rough road to Golgotha. Now, the Romans crucified troublesome slaves and desperate criminals. Roman citizens were spared such a cruel death. But for Jesus, large nails were driven through his feet and his outstretched hands in order to fix him to the crossbeams of wood. The cross was set in a socket in the ground and then lifted up so that the criminal was suspended, left to die from heat and thirst. There were 3 prisoners to be crucified that day, and by 9 o'clock, the 3 crosses were lifted into position. Jesus was on the center one. There's a tiny picture, I'll show it. I'm not sure if that helped, but there you go. Then the soldiers settled down to wait, gambling with dice to while away the time. Jesus looked down at them with pity, and he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they are doing." The religious leaders had arrived to gloat and jeer. "You saved others," they said mockingly, "but you can't save yourself?" One of the criminals hanging on the next cross muttered hoarsely, "Aren't you supposed to be Messiah? Why don't you save us all?" But the other criminal said, "You be quiet. We deserve to die, but this man is innocent." Then he begged Jesus, "When you come into your kingdom, please remember me." "You don't have to wait until then," Jesus replied. "You will be with me in paradise this very day." Some of Jesus' disciples, mostly the women, were there too. "Look after my mother," Jesus whispered to his close friend John. John nodded. "He'll be a son to you now," Jesus told his mother, who stood crying bitterly. At noon, when the sun should have been brightest, thick darkness fell. For 3 hours, Jesus suffered all alone, carrying the weight of the whole world's sin. Then at 3 o'clock, he called out in a clear, triumphant voice, "It is finished." Then he gave up his life and died. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy citizen, asked Pilate's permission to give Jesus proper burial. Nicodemus, who had visited Jesus at night, came to help him. The 2 men gently lifted the body, washed and wrapped it in clean grave clothes, and laid it on a stone ledge in the cave tomb in Joseph's garden. Some of the women who had been at Golgotha followed to see where Jesus was buried. Then, worn out with sadness and crying, they went home. It was Friday evening when Jesus' body was laid in the garden tomb. And that is Good Friday.